What if I told you that one of the most uncomfortable experiences in modern life isn't pain, isn't failure, isn't rejection, but silence? Think about it. Two strangers step into an elevator. The doors close. Nobody speaks. Only a few seconds pass. Yet somehow, the silence starts to feel enormous. Or perhaps you've experienced it during a conversation. Everything is flowing naturally. The discussion moves effortlessly. Then, suddenly, it stops. No words, no sounds. Just silence. And almost immediately, someone feels the urge to say something. Anything. A random question, a small observation, a joke, anything, just to make the silence disappear. But why? Why can a few seconds of silence feel so awkward? Why do humans become uncomfortable when nobody is speaking? Why do we constantly search for words, even when there is nothing important to say? And why, in a world filled with endless noise, are more and more people beginning to crave the very silence they once avoided? Tonight, we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating mysteries of human psychology, a story involving evolution, communication, relationships, social survival, and the hidden ways our brains interpret the absence of sound. This is the story of why silence feels awkward. To understand silence, we first need to understand something fundamental about human beings. Humans are social creatures. Extremely social creatures. For most of our history, we survived in small groups, small tribes, small communities, families that depended on one another. Survival wasn't simply about strength. It wasn't simply about intelligence. It was about cooperation, working together, sharing resources, protecting one another. And communication played a crucial role in making all of that possible. The better humans communicated, the stronger their social bonds became. And the stronger their social bonds, the greater their chances of survival. Over thousands of generations, our brains evolved to pay very close attention to social signals, facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, eye contact, and, of course, conversation. Because conversation is much more than an exchange of information. Conversation is reassurance. It tells us that relationships are functioning normally. It tells us we are accepted. It tells us we belong. And when conversation suddenly disappears, the brain begins asking questions. What happened? Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Are they bored? Do they dislike me? Is something wrong? Interestingly, most of the time, nothing is wrong at all. But the brain doesn't like uncertainty, and silence creates uncertainty. Imagine two situations. In the first situation, someone says, "I'm just thinking about something." Now, the silence makes sense. The brain has an explanation. The silence feels comfortable. In the second situation, someone suddenly becomes quiet. No explanation. No obvious expression. No clear reason. Now, the brain gets to work. What's going on? What are they thinking? Did I do something? The difference isn't the silence itself. The difference is uncertainty. And humans dislike uncertainty. In fact, research suggests that uncertainty can sometimes feel more stressful than receiving bad news. Because when we don't know what's happening, our imagination starts filling in the blanks. And human imagination often creates worse scenarios than reality ever would. Now, let's talk about something psychologists sometimes describe as a social monitoring system. Imagine a radar operating inside your brain, a radar that constantly scans your social environment. It watches people's reactions, their expressions, their responses, their behavior, and it tries to answer one important question: how am I being perceived? This system helps us build relationships, it helps us cooperate, it helps us fit into groups, but it also makes us incredibly sensitive to social signals, including silence. Because silence can mean many different things. It can mean anger, it can mean sadness, it can mean discomfort, it can mean boredom, it can mean reflection, it can mean concentration, it can mean uncertainty. The problem is, the brain often assumes the most concerning explanation first. This tendency is known as negativity bias, the tendency to pay more attention to potential threats than potential safety. From an evolutionary perspective, this made perfect sense. If our ancestors ignored possible dangers, the consequences could be severe. But if they were overly cautious, the cost was usually much smaller. As a result, modern humans inherited brains that are highly sensitive to anything unusual, even something as simple as an unexpected pause in conversation. But there is another reason silence feels uncomfortable, and it has nothing to do with other people. It has everything to do with ourselves. Have you ever noticed something interesting? Many people surround themselves with constant noise: music, podcasts, videos, television, notifications, background sounds, endless streams of information. Why? Because when the outside world becomes quiet, the inside world becomes louder. Suddenly, our thoughts become impossible to ignore. We start thinking about tomorrow, about unfinished responsibilities, about mistakes we made years ago, about fears, regrets, questions, uncertainties. During the day, noise often keeps these thoughts hidden, but silence gives them room to emerge. And for many people, that is what feels uncomfortable. Not silence itself, but what silence reveals. This helps explain something fascinating. Not every culture views silence the same way. In many Western societies, active conversation is often seen as a sign of friendliness, engagement, confidence, warmth. As a result, long pauses can feel awkward. But in some Asian cultures, silence is often interpreted very differently, as respect, as thoughtfulness, as wisdom, as careful consideration. In these contexts, silence is not necessarily a problem to solve. It can be a sign of maturity. This reminds us that our relationship with silence is not entirely universal. Part of it is shaped by culture. Part of it is shaped by expectations. Part of it is learned. Now let's consider something even more interesting. Is silence always uncomfortable? Not at all. In fact, some of the strongest relationships thrive in silence. Think about someone you trust deeply: a close friend, a partner, a family member, someone who knows you well. You can often sit together without speaking and still feel completely comfortable. Why? Because there is no uncertainty, no need to prove that the relationship is working, no need to constantly maintain connection through words. The connection already exists. Silence becomes a sign of trust, not a sign of danger. This reveals an important truth. Silence is not inherently awkward. What makes silence awkward is uncertainty about what the silence means. Once that uncertainty disappears, silence often becomes peaceful, even powerful. In fact, some of the most skilled communicators understand the value of silence. Negotiators use silence. Therapists use silence. Public speakers use silence. Because silence creates space. space to think, space to reflect, space to listen.
Sometimes the most powerful moment in a conversation isn't when someone speaks, it's when nobody speaks at all. Because silence forces attention, it encourages reflection, it gives meaning to the words that come before and after it. Perhaps that is why many people begin seeking silence as they grow older, because they eventually realize something. The modern world is incredibly noisy. Phones vibrate, messages arrive, videos autoplay, notifications compete for attention. Content never ends. The world constantly demands our focus, and the human brain was never designed for endless stimulation. Sometimes it needs empty space, space to process, space to recover, space to breathe. And silence provides exactly that. So the next time a conversation suddenly stops and silence appears, remember this. Silence is not always a sign that something is wrong. Silence is not always a problem that needs fixing. Silence is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is simply a pause, a moment of reflection, a moment of presence, a moment where nothing needs to be said.
Because in the end, humans are creatures that search for meaning. We constantly interpret signals. We constantly analyze situations. We constantly wonder what other people are thinking. And when words disappear, our brains immediately begin searching for answers. But sometimes, there is no hidden message, no secret conflict, no mystery waiting to be solved. Sometimes, silence is simply silence. And perhaps one of the most valuable skills a person can learn is becoming comfortable inside it. Because not every moment needs to be filled with words. Not every pause needs an explanation. And not every silence needs to be broken. Some silences were meant to be experienced. And some of life's most meaningful moments happen when nobody says anything at all.